Good evening. Or as we say, the Lord be with you at the Lutheran Church. My name is Daniel Locke. It's my honor and privilege to serve as pastor here at St. Mark's Lutheran Church and to welcome all of you this evening to our conversation with Mark Woods. Thank you for coming out. I want to say that tonight's conversation, as well as many of the other events that are hopefully placed in your hands as you came through the door, are a product of a grant process called Vision to Action through the Florida Bahamas Synod of the ELCA, of which we're a member. And through a grant process, we received funds to put on events like this to engage our community members and invite folks in to have conversations around, like tonight, lament and grief and creation. Other conversations coming up in the fall, some around democracy and having fellowship and dinner with friends and community members. We'll have an Oktoberfest in October. There's an organ concert in September. Our nave, the building you're in right now, celebrates its 40th birthday this year. And so we've recently remodeled our baptismal font. And so we're inviting everyone back for a 40th anniversary celebration and a remembrance of baptism with food afterwards. San Marco Chamber Music Society, who we've been in partnership with for a long time, a local nonprofit chamber group here in San Marco. They play concerts regularly throughout the year, and they are phenomenal. Two of their members are members of our church, and so we're honored to have them here. And then, of course, if you've got a loved one that is furry and likes to bark or meow or chirp or creep or crawl, come on out October 19th for Blessing of the Animals. In honor and memory of St. Francis of Assisi, we'll gather in our courtyard to bless the animals. So just want to say you are always welcome here. There's always a place for you at St. Mark's. And of course, we'd love to have you in worship on Sunday mornings at 9:30 or the first and third Saturdays of the month at 5:30. Tomorrow at 5:30. But for tonight, we're gathered to listen to a conversation with author Mark Woods, who is a columnist at the Times-Union for many years now. And I don't want to take too much time here because I think he'll tell us his story better than I could. But on what started as a trip and a voyage through national parks turned into a bigger kind of life experience as a process of lament and grief, something I think we can all relate to, then took on a new meaning in God's creation, which I think is a really cool intersection between lament, grief, and God's creation. And a story that starts in the mountains of Maine and ends at New Year's Eve at the crater of a volcano in Hawaii. Mark journeyed America, and he's going to tell us all about it tonight. And so we'll have time for Mark to talk about his experience and share some slides, and then at the end we'll have some space for a little bit of question and answer, and then you're all invited to fellowship in what we call Heart Hall, which is straight through those doors, and to the left there's some food and fellowship there. Last two things I'll say. Mark's book, Lassoing the Sun. If you'd like a copy, San Marco Bookstore is here selling copies, $21.49. She'll be out there at a table ready to sell you a copy if you'd like, and I'm sure Mark would be happy to sign it for you. Is that true, Mark? I don't want to put you on the spot. If Mark won't sign it, I will. Just kidding. So books are available out there. And then if you need to use the restroom this evening, you'll head straight back into Hart Hall there and then follow the signs into the gym. Down on the left are our restrooms. Did I miss anything, those of you who have planned this evening's event? No? Excellent. Again, thank you for being here. Thanks for coming out and enjoy the conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, Mark Woods.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. I was going to start by saying I have fond memories of this church. I used to live down London Road, down the end of the block, and one of my strong memories of Jacksonville, and when I lived here, was a fire across the street at Hendricks Avenue, and how this church, the parishioners came out. I remember they sang a hymn over to Hendricks Avenue, and it gave me goosebumps now thinking about it. So that was really, what an amazing gesture. So I wanted to thank you all for that. So I was going to start by saying, how many of you have been to a national park? Wow, almost. Okay, that's a good crowd, good audience. So yeah, you'll probably be jealous of what I had this year. So it goes back to 2011. I got an email. Pastor mentioned, I'm a columnist at the Times-Union, and I got an email in my inbox about this Eugene C. Pulliam Fellowship. And I know I deleted it at least once and twice. I think probably the third time I stopped and read it, and what is this? And it basically was this fellowship given to one journalist in the country each year, basically to kind of pursue a dream project, take a sabbatical year. And so I started to think about it, like what would I do? And I looked at the previous winners, and they were very heavy, meaty kind of topics. They were, technology, gun violence, education, crime, poverty, politics, all these things. I thought, I'm not sure I want to immerse myself in any of these for a year. If I had a year, I'd want to go travel to national parks or something. And I thought, well, they'll never give me that. But then I realized this is a few hours after Ken Burns' documentary came out, and national parks were on people's minds, and 2016 was going to be the centennial of the National Park Service. So the very last day that this deadline for this, I submitted like a 20-page proposal that basically said, I want to, many people have documented the history of the national parks, the last 100 years. But at the centennial, I want to look ahead and try and figure out what's going to happen, what could happen to these places in the next 100 years. So I wrote this proposal, sent it off, thought, well, I'll never win. But a few months later, I got a voicemail, and I didn't even answer my phone. I think I thought it was spam or something, and it was from the director of the judging committee for this, and I called back and said, well, you're our winner for next year. So all of a sudden I went and told my bosses I'm not going to be working next year, and won this fellowship. But right away when I won it, people said, there's two things. They'd say, do you need somebody to carry your bags, or take pictures or whatever? And the second thing they would do is tell me you have to go to such and such a park. Like all of you have been to parks. Once you go to one and you have favorites, you're out there for that park. You kind of so I told people my goal was not, there were I think about 400 National Park Service sites at the time, and 59 national parks of the iconic ones. It was not to make it to all of the parks. It was to go to one park a month and have each park symbolize a different issue for the future. So I'm kind of going to walk you through the year, the 12 months, the 12 parks, and how my year changed. But first I was going to say, probably everything kind of starts with my parents, my love of the outdoors. My dad was a Baptist minister, and my mom was a social worker, and I'm not sure when this was taken, but they're young and relaxed, so I think it was before the kids, before I was the oldest of three, and I guess my mom got a deal on yellow slickers or something, and I think that might have been Crater Lake, or it might have been Tahoe. I'm not sure what but we lived from age 6 to 10. We lived out west, and that was, I think, taken when there. And we had this pop-up camper. These were our summer vacations. We'd dragging that pop-up camper around, and I always say, even though my dad was a minister, when he was setting that up, he would swear. That was the one time he'd be swearing so much, like the dad in A Christmas Story fighting with the furnace. He'd be out fighting with the pop-up camper. And one of my first national parks was Redwood National Park when I was probably 8. And so shortly before that year that I was going to have in the national parks, I was turning 50, and I said, I want to go back to Redwood. So my daughter, who is in the yellow there, was about the same age I was my daughter Mia, when I first went. So I wanted her to kind of have that experience of being about that age, going to Redwood National Park. So I did that shortly before the year began, and then started the year in January in Acadia National Park. On January 1, atop Cadillac Mountain. The reason I chose that is because that's the place first sunlight hits on American soil, on the continental United States. So I liked the symbolism of here's the first start of a new year, top Cadillac Mountain on January 1. Now, it was quite overcast, And I asked if there was anybody, I contacted the Park Service and Friends of Acadia and said, is there anybody up there that goes up to top of Acadia on a Cadillac on January 1? They said, you should contact Lily Pugh, who's the president of Friends of Acadia. She goes up there every year. So I contacted her, and I went with Lily, and they were and her friend, and they were apologizing because they said, well, that it's all foggy, which it often is with top Cadillac. And I said, that's okay. We get beautiful sunrises in Florida all the time. This was memorable because it was this pink kind of. It turned. We had to look at our watch. Okay, it's about sunrise. We counted down like you would do for the New Year's Eve. And I said it was memorable. And this is Lily and Carol. That's what it looked like atop there. And we mountain biked in the dark up to the top, and then we mountain biked down. And in the summer that would be water there, but in the winter you had ice falls. So it was a very memorable cold way to begin the year. So in February I went to Saguaro National Park in Arizona, partly I think just to warm up, but partly I wanted to think about, there's a handful of national parks that are named after their vegetation. Redwood, Joshua Tree, Saguaro, named after the cactus. And, we think of the West, we think, of old Western movies, we think of the kind of this iconic cactus. And it's really only in a portion of the West. And I always like the part, I think there's a stat about Tucson that there's, it's a population similar to Jacksonville, but about 1 million people, and there's about 1 million saguaro there. So it's almost a one-to-one people to saguaro ratio. The other reason I went there is because after my dad died in 1996, and my mom moved to Tucson. That's where she moved, and she loved the desert. She loved Saguaro National Park. She volunteered there, and she passed that love down to me and my 2 sisters and to her grandkids. So I wanted to include Saguaro National Park, basically because she had made me love that place. And what I should have said what I was going to say. I got there that February 7th of that year, and my mom, the day before, had gone in the hospital. She wasn't feeling well. And so I landed, got there, and next day went to the hospital. Before I even got there, she called me on the phone because I can remember pulling over, and she said, the doctor just came in and said, I'm dying. My mom was one of the healthiest people. I mean, at age 73, she was about as healthy as anybody I knew. She hiked 3 miles every day. But they told her she had a rare, inoperable cancer that really wasn't anything they could do, and that she basically had months to live. So the way that hit me was, at least initially, I thought this project that I thought was so important, so significant, was pretty meaningless. Should I even do this traveling around to national parks? But my mom right away said, no, I want you to continue to do that. And I think it quickly became more meaningful to me because of my parents' love of the national parks. And I felt like, this has now become, it started off something very journalistic, it became very personal, and kind of a love letter to the parks and a love letter to my mom and dad. So I did stick with it, but I did change it somewhat. I changed plans, like I stayed in the Southwest for somewhat. That next month I went to Glen Canyon National Recreation Area, partly to think about water. Future of water in the West is a big issue. It's a big issue everywhere. But the Colorado River, before it gets to the Grand Canyon, passes through Glen Canyon. And that's where we have Glen Canyon Dam, which created Lake Powell Reservoir behind it. And kind of the idea of water out there is such a commodity. So I wanted to think about that, what's gonna happen in the future as Phoenix continues to grow, the whole Las Vegas continues to grow. How do we handle that? And so that was kind of the journalistic side of it, but each of these now had kind of another piece to them. That when my mom turned 70, she did vacations with each of her kids. And I think if you told me when I was a teenager, you're gonna do a vacation with your mom, I would have thought, you're crazy, I'm not doing. But did this rafting trip through the Colorado River, on the Colorado River through Canyonlands National Park, which empties into Lake Powell. So that place, I have pretty fond memories of that trip with my mom. Another thing, well, you can kind of see it here. Being out there again and again, the night skies were stunning. And I thought about when I was a kid, when we'd go to Redwood National Park, that's some of my strongest memories, was doing these ranger talks, going to the ranger talk, and then with the flashlight, walking back to your campsite, and then turn off your flashlight and seeing the stars. And we kind of forget just how bright the stars are when you get out in these places. April, I continued down the Colorado River to Grand Canyon National Park, partly just because it's one of my favorite parks, and I was determined to make it one of the pieces to this. It's kind of one of those places, I've sometimes said, even, I grew up son of a pastor, but my parents kind of taught me that places like the Grand Canyon were spiritual, that's like a natural church there. And I kind of grew up feeling that way, connected to a place like the Grand Canyon, probably more than to any man-made building. I did a hike where I hiked down to the river there from the rim, and I bumped into this couple and this boy, and he had the bluest eyes I've ever seen, and they called him Blue. So once I saw the eyes, I realized, okay, it's a boy named Blue, and he kept saying, I'm going to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and I thought, well, if I'm looking for the future of the national parks, could do worse than a boy named Blue. And I saw them down. I did make it down the river. Saw them down there, and he was still chipper. And I said, "Has he been like this the whole way?" And the dad said, "No, he was on my shoulders asleep for much of the way." From there, I came back to Florida, Dry Tortugas. I wanted to include one Florida park. I thought about the Everglades or Biscayne, but Dry Tortugas I'd always wanted to get to. It's these little 7 small islands off about 70 miles off Key West, and I think the park itself is 100 square miles, but 99% of that is water. So it's kind of the opposite. It's going from this arid southwest with a ribbon of water going through it, where I was at the last month, to a park that is almost all water, and that's part of why I wanted to go there. The other is one of the islands has Fort Jefferson on it. Sure, it's not moving. Seems to be stuck. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about Fort Jefferson. It's was built in the 1800s, and I feel like it's almost like that century's version of sending a man to the moon or something. I forget how many. I think it's 18 million bricks were used to build it. It's one of the largest forts in America. It has all this stories of shipwrecks and pirates and Hemingway and Dr. Mudd, who was the doctor involved in the John Wilkes Booth, was out there. So it has this, it feels like a fictional novel that's true. So, and our national parks at their best are both this compilation of history and nature. So I feel like the Dry Tortugas were that. Okay, let me try. Okay, there we go. There's the fort. Yeah, it has a giant moat around it. So I camped out there. And I camped next to the fort, and there's only, I think, maybe 12 sites there, I think it is. During the day, there's hundreds of people there, but they come over on the ferry or on the seaplane. But once they go back, all of a sudden you have this kind of tropical island, just you and a few new friends, and the giant fort. And when I was there, it was this supermoon, and it would come up, just giant ball on the horizon, and it was so bright that you didn't even need to use a flashlight at night. It was just, so that's one of my strongest memories there. That's during the day, people snorkeling. The reason I took that picture is at the end, somebody, I think that was, if I remember right, it was from Bordeaux, France, and that translates to Paradise on Earth, God Bless America. And one thing that struck me was that when you travel to our national parks, you meet a lot of foreign visitors. I don't know what percentage it is of people, visitors to national parks are from other countries. And they, especially the Europeans, would say to me, like, well, if we were having a contest in cathedrals or castles, we'd whoop you in that. But do you realize what you have in national parks? We have beautiful mountains, we have beautiful places, but we don't have national parks like you have. And they'd ask me, do Americans appreciate that? Do they realize that? And I said, I think some do and some don't. And that was kind of one of my epiphanies for the year, was that we have to pass these things down from generation to generation. And that's both on the micro level, my parents passing it down to me passing it down to my daughter. It's also on the national scale, that if we don't have that will, we won't preserve these. So that was kind of one of the major takeaways from my year in the parks. June, went to Yellowstone, world's first national park, 1872. And when I won the fellowship, and I knew I had to kind of include Yellowstone because it was the first, but I really wasn't all that excited about it. I just had these some of these other parks, I had these really strong memories from childhood. Yellowstone, we went there, and I didn't really have the strong memories. And when I got there, before I went there, I asked my mom, why don't I remember Yellowstone very well? And she said, well, we passed through, we watched Old Faithful, and we kind of went on our way. And I think that's another lesson I kind of learned. If you kind of are doing the check it off the box, you remember you went there, but if you spend 24 hours there, then it's a whole different thing. Or if you spend 2 weeks there, like I did this time, it really made an impression on me. It's not just the first national park, it's just a remarkable place. And I went there partly to think about this one to kind of symbolize animals. And the bison is the iconic, it's literally on the patch, National Park Service patch. The prehistoric herd there was down to something like a dozen bison 100 years ago. Now, if you go there, I think there's actually 2 herds, but they were like literally about a dozen bison in this massive, massive park. That's how much we had hunted them to almost extinction. Now, if you go there, there's 4,000 of them. You get stuck in bison jams when you're driving around, and I say this one, its mother taught it to look both ways before crossing. I always kind of laugh. There was somebody there driving, and you'll see a car pulling up. I think you would let the bison pass, but he decides, I'm going to pull up, and I should have kept it rolling, but the bison turned and just kind of stood and looked at him like. So that trip, that's my daughter Mia. That was one. My family did not go on all these trips, but they were able to go on that one with me. And while I was there, they flew back to Jacksonville, and I stayed and did interviews, talked to rangers, did some fun things. Was planning to come back to Jacksonville when I was checking in all this time with my sister was in Tucson with my mom. I think both my sisters were then, and they said, no, I think you shouldn't go back to Jacksonville. You need to come to Tucson now. So I flew from Yellowstone to Tucson, and then on June 30th of that year, my mom died, and it hit me. I don't know if it hit me in the moment, but it definitely hit me later that it's the exact midpoint of the year, and I felt like that year was kind of split in two. The first half was kind of coping with I was going to have this loss. That it was clear at a certain point I came to that realization. Second part was how do you go forward after that loss? And for me, in both cases, parks, the national parks, nature in general, outdoors, were key to the the grieving process. And I felt like that's kind of the beauty of the national parks. I can go to places and I can feel my parents there. My mom, she kept saying, I don't want a big service. I don't know why. She said, I don't want a big service in a church. She went to church every Sunday. And so we kind of honored that. We didn't have a service at church. We went to the national park, Saguaro National Park, where she volunteered and had a service for her at the visitor center, which I think and hope she would have liked. And so that was kind of the end of my first half of the year and start of the second half. And she and I had planned to go to, when I won this, she was going to do one trip to me. We were going to go to Denali National Park, probably in July or August. And once I knew that she wasn't going to be able to do that, I just decided I don't think I want to do that by myself. It'll be too depressing. I'll decided to go to kind of the opposite extreme as Alaska went to Gateway National Recreation Area in New York City. Partly because when I met with National Parks Conservation Association people, they're kind of an advocacy group, they said, you should, I was talking about including an urban park, because for the centennial, the Park Service talked about our first century was about bringing people to the parks. In the second century, we also want to bring parks to the people. We want to have some urban parks. So I wanted to include one urban park. And the MPCA folks said, in 1972, we created 2 national recreation areas, one in Gateway National Recreation Area in New York and Golden Gate in San Francisco. They said Golden Gate's kind of a prime example of the how to do it. It has great philanthropy, it has good management, it has all these positives. They said, Gateway has been mismanaged, neglected, it's a mess, you should go there. And I was like, well, that's an interesting pitch. They kept telling me, it has such potential. They said, you can camp there. They said it has a campground, and you can see Manhattan. I thought, well, okay. Once I got there, that excited me, like camping in New York City. So I get there, and you can see the sign for the campground. I don't know if you can read the bottom sign. It says NYC Sanitation Training Center. So I'm starting to wonder what I got myself into. And this is Floyd Bennett Field. I don't know if any of you are aware of, if you're from New York, you may or may not be aware of Floyd Bennett. Even New Yorkers weren't, but it was 1920s New York City's first airport. I think it opened on like Black Friday or something about that time. So it feels doomed from its beginnings. But in the 1920s, in that era, it was kind of this place where a lot of famous flights, Wrong Way Corrigan took off from there, and there was all these kind of epic adventures, but then it didn't work out as a city airport. It was hard to get to then, it's hard to get to now by public transit and those kind of things. So it kind of just sat there, but in 1940s, it became our busiest military airport. Then after that, again, just kind of sat there. 1972, they give it to the Park Service. Park Service, okay, what do we do with this place, this island that is full of concrete? So yeah, there's the campground is like right across the street from that in the and I wish I could recreate the mosquitoes for you, because it was Yellowstone. I had no issues with the mosquitoes. There it was the worst mosquitoes, and that was the RV site, which was even bleaker. Yeah. There's one of the old hangars, another old hangar. One of the rangers took me to, this was Dead Horse Bay is its actual name. And he said, we call it Bottle Beach. You'll see why when we get there. A landfill had broken, and he said, we bring kids here for field trips. I was like, you bring kids to Bottle Beach? And he said, well, it's the nearest place we can get water. We do all these water testing, but it's also to teach them a lesson that when you throw something away, it just doesn't poof, magically disappear. It's kind of this, and recycle. That's why we recycle. That's why we think about, what we throw away. So I sometimes think about Bottle Beach now. Anyway, after a few days there, I'm like, why am I here? Why this? I could have been in Glacier. I could have been a lot of places. But also then they start to show me some of the things. Here's one of the hangars that was kind of basically restored to its 1920s era. Another hangar was restored. This is the head ranger. He was on his day off, and he grew up in Brooklyn. And he said, every work, when I come to work, I think, I wish this had been here when I was a kid. And he said, let's get out. There's this one grasslands area. And he said, let's go through it. And he was all excited. And he said, you don't really see it, do you? I said, you just see a bunch of weeds. And I said, yeah. And he started to show me, well, look at this, and look at this bird and this bird. He said, this isn't Yellowstone or Yosemite, but this is New York City coming back to what it was 200 years ago. And this is a natural spot in New York City. And so I started to kind of appreciate that. I went kayaking in Jamaica Bay. And by the end of the week, by the end of my time there, it was one of the more challenging spots, I think, because I was really freshly grieving, but also it made me think about wherever my mom and dad went, they would always find it could be the smallest thing that was beauty. And that was kind of the thing I took away from that month. August, I went to Yosemite National Park, partly another issue, loving our parks to death. You hear that, and perhaps nowhere is that an issue with overcrowding and those kind of issues in Yosemite Valley in August. But I didn't really want to just write about traffic, or that felt boring to me. I wanted to write about rock climbers. 100 years ago, nobody was climbing El Capitan, 3,000-foot rock wall. Now, El Capitan actually gets crowded, and people, like spectators, and this was the head climbing ranger. While we were talking, a bear walked behind us. So I did not climb El Capitan, but I did climb Half Dome, and not the rock face that we all see. There's a side of it that has cables that go on the, you'll be able to see them here, the cables going up the side, which for the real rock climbers would be no big deal. It'd probably be like going on a jungle gym. For me, my palms sweat just kind of looking at that now. It's about a 45-degree angle, I think 400 feet, and it's pretty daunting still, but it was a memorable piece of that. Somebody wrote in rocks at the top, it ain't easy. September, as I mentioned earlier, our national parks capture history. So I wanted to have one park that was about history. And I thought it could be Gettysburg or Antietam or a lot of different places. But from the day I won the fellowship, I wanted to make September in Flight 93. Partly because Lori Guadagno, she lives out at the beach, and her brother Richard was one of the passengers on Flight 93. And I went with Lori and her family for the paper for the 5th anniversary to Flight 93, and there were no monuments yet. It was just kind of this field. And I don't know if you remember, Shanksville, it was basically an abandoned strip mine. And Lori said the first time she went there, she thought, I never want to come back here. It's one of the bleakest places I've ever seen. But now they have, this is some of the features there. This is a ranger who does a talk about how many of the passengers had connections to nature. There was a arborist. There was a lawyer in California who had sued the National Park Service for not being too environmentally friendly. So kind of the irony that this is now a national park. And there was Richard Guadagno, who was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Ranger. He was the only Department of Interior employee on the plane. So they're now across the street from Flight 93. There's the Richard Guadagno Game Lands that they named after him. And so Lori talks about how when she first went there, she never wanted to go back. But now it's 2,000 acres, and not only have they built this kind of stark but it's a memorable memorial with one name on each panel, but nature has come back throughout the grounds. 2,000 acres full of wildflowers and wildlife, and Lori talks about how peaceful it is to go there. So this, unintended, this helped me with the grieving process. I told her, I got to say goodbye to my mom. She didn't get to say goodbye to Richard, that day. So, and through her, I met a lot of the other passengers' families. So that's a place, I think I've been back there 5 or 6 times now. It's a pretty special place. And I like how the Park Service, this is different than Gettysburg. You're creating a national park to tell the story of this thing that happened a long time ago. Park Service is creating something that we all remember, but 100 years from now, we won't be here, and it'll be doing that. So how do you create that place to tell that story? So it's kind of a fascinating exercise. October, I went to Olympic National Park, and partly to think about sound. This guy, Gordon Hempton, has won Emmys for recording natural sound. He calls himself the sound tracker, and Gordon says there's only about a dozen places in America where you can go for 15 minutes and not hear man-made sound. And when he first told me that, I thought, well, that can't be true. I can go in Grand Canyon, I can go a lot of places, and I won't. And he kind of ruined it for me, because now you go there, and he's right. It is hard to find, even places you think are very, very remote, where you go that long. But he says the whole rainforest in Olympic National Park is one of those places. So I went, in the 1980s, he established this place that he called the 1 square inch of silence out in the whole rainforest. And it isn't silent, the goal is free of man-made sound. So I contacted him and said, can you take me out to the 1 square inch of silence? So we hiked out to it, and so if a plane flies overhead, he records the time, the decibel level, and he writes the airlines letters and says, I want you to fly around this area. His goal is to make Olympic the world's first sound national park, which probably isn't going to happen, but I kind of like his vision, and I do now, I think often, because of that month, about the sound of a place. There's a couple spots in the Grand Canyon that are beautiful, but there's helicopters flying overhead all the time. So it has that beauty, but sound can take away, or it can make a place. So I camped. It rained the whole week I was there, except for the one night I camped in the rainforest, and it didn't rain or drop. So my mom, one of her prized possessions was this camper van, and when she realized she was dying, she asked any of us, the 3 kids, do you guys want the camper van? And we all said, our garages are so crammed full, we can't fit in the camper van, we can't take. But I think it was when I was in that June month in Yellowstone, and I was looking at camper vans. I thought, I think I want Mom's camper. And I called, and she was not in great shape by then. My sister said she got a big smile when I said I wanted the camper van. So she and I, when we did the rafting trip, that we drove the camper van that. So in November, my family, we all gathered again in Tucson to get together for Thanksgiving, and my wife and daughter flew back to Jacksonville. My sisters left, and I started driving the camper van away from Tucson back across the United States. And when we were growing up, we did those big cross-country road trips. I don't know how many of you did. I feel like that's a bygone thing. But it was really fun to be doing that again, even if, and a friend, Chris Burns, who lives not far from here, agreed to join me. So that, like I said, it was Thanksgiving. Chris flew out the next day. We started driving, and we got to El Paso, and I called my wife, and I said, yeah, I think we're going to stay at a Holiday Inn here. And she goes, what? Why are you staying in a hotel? You got a camper van, the camper van. I said, well, I don't know if there's any, I don't think there's any campgrounds in here. I said, well, I think we can camp at a Walmart. So I'd heard that, so we looked it up, yeah. So we camped in the Walmart, but I didn't think it out. This, again, was the day after Thanksgiving. So it was Black Friday at a Walmart in El Paso. It was not the most peaceful. But I hopefully, for my friend Chris, made up for it the next night. We veered south to Big Bend National Park, and somewhere down there, this is Chisos Basin, is the camper van there, and that's a pretty stunning place in Big Bend National Park. We stopped at Gulf Islands National Seashore, and then the thing I remember about Gulf Islands was when I got out, how it smelled. It smelled like salt marsh. It smelled like, and I realized, smell is a pretty powerful thing. It smelled like I'm getting back close to Jacksonville, to Round Marsh, to the Timucuan Preserve, and so that it was a nice feeling, that sense of being close to home. When I was creating the year, I had lots of different scenarios of where I would go. The one piece I never knew, I couldn't quite figure out was, what am I going to finish with? Nothing quite felt right. I thought about, well, do I go to Denali for my mom? And I thought, I started the year in Maine in January. I don't know if I want to be in Alaska in December. I thought about a bunch of different places, but at some point somebody said, you started with the sunrise in Maine. Are you going to go to Hawaii? It hit me, I could maybe go there for a sunset. And I started reading about Haleakala National Park. It means house of the sun. And it was made a national park literally the week I was born. The week my parents, I'm the oldest, they became parents. And the legend of Haleakala, the mythology is that this little boy, the demigod Maui, so Haleakala is the giant crater, volcanic crater that dominates about 2/3 of the island of Maui. But the story of the little boy named Maui is that his mother tells him, there's not enough time in the day for me to get all my chores done. And so the little boy Maui in the darks grabs a branch and he climbs up to the top of the volcano and he makes a lasso. And then when the sun passes overhead, he lassos the sun, pulls it down, and tells the sun, I'll let you go, but you have to promise to slow down when you pass over here. And the sun says, okay. So the local legend is that the sun slows down when it passes over the volcano there. So I thought, okay, boy lassoing the sun for his mom. This feels like this is where I'm supposed to go. It kind of had, and it has some of the darkest night skies in America. It has this vegetation that's only found there. I don't know if you can see, there's a little car there. You're above the clouds. Mark Twain went there as a young man. He was still writing about it when he was old, saying it was the sublimest spectacle he'd ever seen. Most people go for sunrise. You can kind of see them there. I hiked into the crater the night before and spent December 31st in the crater, and it's known as being one of the quietest places on Earth. Different from 1 square inch of silence, just because you're in this, and you're 2,000 miles from, and it was eerily quiet. I could hear my heartbeat in my ear. It kind of rattles you how quiet it is. Then the next morning I hiked out and went to the summit at sunset, and from there gathered with others and watched the sun pass over, and it did feel like it lasted forever. I don't know if that's because you're up so high, but it really did feel like the sun was moving slowly. But I took comfort in kind of knowing it was passing over there, and in a few hours it would be reaching Acadia and Cadillac Mountain, and my friends Lily and Carol would be there greeting it, and that would wrap up my year. And that's how I came up with the title, Lassoing the Sun. So that is the story of my year in the book, and thank you very much for listening to me. Don't know if people have questions. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Check. Always carry a spare. Thank you, Mark, for sharing your journey in the national parks. We'll take a moment for a couple questions and answers, and I'll help facilitate that. And if nobody has one at the moment, I had one. But Noah, I'll kick us off. How about that? I'll kick the ball. Man, I in the opening forward, you had a line about you loved taking photographs and baseball for the same reason because your dad did. Right, and
Yep.
Which felt powerful for me. And then you talk about chasing the what is your Disney moment and like what is your thing. As someone who just took my son to Disney last week and also lost my mother. But my question then, because I think a lot of folks in here are also in a stage of life where either they have older parents or children or grandchildren, and you talked about that trip with your mom when she was 70 and passing along your kind of legacy through your children. And so I'm wondering for all of us gathered and from your experience, what you might offer to us as a motivation, as advice, as a legacy learning thing for us as we too, in the business of life, seek those moments where they don't always come as an email invitation, but to slow down and does that question make any sense to you?
Sure. Yeah. Sometimes I think I write in the book, like, it was not like we had a lot of money, and sometimes I'd be jealous of friends that had certain things, but I realize in hindsight, the camper van, packing up and doing those kind of things, that I went to all these national parks as a kid, what an amazing gift that was, and that's the kind of thing I don't think you realize in the moment when you're a kid, but you realize later. So I feel like it's the cliches of spending time together, and like I kind of hit on earlier, from the bigger scale, I feel like it's people ask, what can I do for the national parks? I think it's somewhat as simple as just go there, and even better, take somebody with you, take somebody you love with you, whether it's a parent, child, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, and that connection to the national park, you're passing it along to others, and I think it lasts, like I write in the forward how my daughter complained and I've heard that, I think I complained when I was a kid, but I think something sticks when you do those kind of experiences, and it's somewhere embedded in your brain and your body, so.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The legacy, from sunrise to sunset, and with the 93 field growing new vegetation and the New York growing new, it's just, anyway, so much power.
Sorry, a little intimidating with the microphone. You mentioned the first national park was 1870, and I think about what our future will be. I always tend to think of the national parks as preserving this moment in time, and it will be here for now on. But as I'm listening to you, I realize, no, the national parks have changed in the 150 years. What do you see, and what are the folks you talk to, what is that vision for 100 years from now? Is there going to be something different that we haven't thought about?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That's what I kind of asked every place I went to. The beauty of the project was I got to meet with rangers and superintendents, and that was one of the standard questions. What's your park going to look? What did it look like 100 years ago? What's it going to look like in another 100 years? And I guess I didn't even say that. I got detoured on the Dry Tortugas one. Part of the reason I chose that was it had these rich stories, but part of it was almost all the parks talk about how climate change is affecting them, even if it's not just the ones on coastlines, but where temperatures are changing and vegetation is moving. But I thought about, well, I could go to Glacier, but I chose Dry Tortugas to illustrate that, because here's this park where the water's kind of lapping at the moat. And when I asked the rangers there, they said, well, some rangers live out there, and they said, I don't think in 25 or 30 years we'll probably be living out here. And I said, well, what about 100 years? And they said, we'll be snorkeling. It'll be down to they were joking, but so that's one of their dilemmas financially is how much do you invest in preserving that fort there? And it needs like tens of millions of dollars of repair. It feels, horrific just to let it go, but do you invest in it? So there's challenges. Every single park kind of had interesting stories about that, like how, they are not, in some ways they're frozen in time, and that's the beauty of, you can go and stand in a place where I stood as a kid, and it, to me, looks probably somewhat the same. I say that if I go back to my hometown, my little hometown, Wisconsin, I have to tell my daughter, well, this used to be here, this used to be there, but go to the Redwoods, and it really looks the same to me, but it is, you're right, it is not the same. So that was kind of one of the epiphanies. I think before that year, I thought, these places are frozen in time, but they're not. So how does the Park Service approach that as one of their challenges?
Thank you. Anybody else? Ooh, perfect.
As we sit in the church, I'm just wondering, a lot of us feel a little closer to God at a park like this or any beautiful nature spot. Well, have you had that experience, and where did you feel kind of that you were a little closer to God?
I think all of them do that to you. I mean, most the natural beauty. I mean, like I said, the Grand Canyon feels like, I don't know, both when you're on the rim watching the light kind of on the rock, or going down in it. That's one of my favorite. I think being down at the bottom of the Grand Canyon feels very spiritual to me. And I've said, like, somebody asked beforehand what my favorite park is, and I said Redwood and Grand Canyon. Is my usually go-to answer. I can't pick one. And it's partly where you went and who you went with. And that was my, but it also hit me, those two parks do something that is, I don't know if it's spiritual, but they feel very different, but the one thing they do to me is they make you feel incredibly small. Like, both physically, like Grand Canyon is so big, these redwoods are so big, but then also in time. The rock layers are literally telling you, here's the story of billions of years. And then you go to the redwoods and they tell you some of these trees are 2,000 years old. And you think about that, you're like, when America was created, this was already 1,700 years old, and so that feels, having that sense of how small we are, to me, feels spiritual and good. I mean, like I tell people, like that being small isn't it kind of like, okay, I need to stop, kind of the classic, stop sweating the small stuff. You're just a speck, and kind of think about what's important and what isn't. So, don't know if that answers your question.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Mark. Anybody else have a question? Oh.
I just wanted to know what Mia is doing now.
Well, you may have seen her. She is working at Disney.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Although I'm not supposed to, just keep it between us. Yeah, I'm not supposed to say, she's a character there, so she's Mickey or Minnie or Daisy or, I think I did try and carefully allude to it because they're not supposed to say that. I guess we're live streaming this. Now I'm going to be in trouble. Yeah. But yeah, she works at Disney and Universal too, and I think I wrote about how, she asked me what's my happiest place, what's your happiest place on earth, and I said it's not Disney, it's not a theme park, it's a national park. So, but she's very happy. She loves working at Disney.
I see you. I'm coming, Marty.
It sounds like you had quite a trip with this whole thing. Are you planning on doing any more of this with other parks? You going to continue this throughout your life, and then we write another book, or continue doing that?
Yeah.
And do you need someone to carry your bags?
Yeah.
You got
Or
a
a
schlepper
chaplain.
here. You got a schlepper. I'll drive anywhere you want to go.
Yeah, I don't know about another book. The first one about did me in. It was hard, but I have definitely continued. I think every year since then, gone at least one national. I'm going back to Olympic next week. I haven't been back since the book. I was going to go to North Cascades, which is that same area, but there's basically closed because of fires. I had a backcountry permit. I mean, the one thing it kind of sparked in me is I throughout my 20s, 30s, 40s, I stayed very active. I was outside doing a lot of outdoor activities. I probably didn't almost no camping. We did all that camping when I was a kid. During that year, I camped at most parks, partly to save money, but partly because I felt like if I was experiencing a park overnight, 24/7, being out in dark, I was experiencing it a different way. And I kind of fell back in love with backpacking, with camping. So I've done, last summer, or 2 summers ago, hiked the John Muir Trail, 220 miles in the Sierras. And so I've gone from decades without doing any kind of backcountry stuff to doing a lot of it. So, I definitely have fallen back in love, and that's kind of also almost feels like another spiritual, because it's so simple, boiling things down to simplistic. Just, are you warm? Are you cold? Are you have enough water? Are you hungry? And it's so yeah. So yes, I definitely hope to keep doing that as long as I can. I don't know about it. I don't know about another book, but
Thank you.
I was wondering, in the course of your travels, if you witnessed any wild animal behavior that changed your mind about a preconception about wild animals.
I'm trying to think of anything that changed my mind. I don't know. I mean, the memorable, saw a grizzly in Yellowstone and came up over a ridge, and it was thankfully pretty far away. We heard a splash. That's how I first saw it. It splashed into a creek, and it took off, and it was running. And I didn't know grizzlies could run that fast. It was running, and it ran. We watched for felt like forever. It was running and but it was running away from us. So again, it kind of I don't know but it reinforced. We didn't want anything to do with us. It didn't want anything to do with us. So as long as you kind of respect the territories, and that you're fine out there. People often ask about, like in the Sierras, they ask about bears. Those are all black bears, which is, I'm not really worried about those. Grizzlies, I do get a little, don't know. Probably another, I guess, memorable one, but I don't know if it changed anything, was seeing a condor in Grand Canyon, actually seeing 3. There's only 100 some condors in the world, and they're standing there. These tall birds, about as ugly as can be, look prehistoric, and then when it took off, just these 9-foot wings, and just not even flapping them, just gliding, and it was it was so beautiful to see it flying. So I don't know if that changed anything with me, but it definitely stuck with me that so wildlife is a pretty special component of being out in these places.
Have you hit Denali yet?
Yes, that's a really good question. I did. The friend who drove cross country with me, he and his wife had a trip scheduled, an REI trip to Denali, and she hurt her back, and he called me 2 days before the trip and said, you probably can't, a ticket would be really expensive, you probably can't do this, but we can't get it refunded, and I wouldn't even want you to pay, but if you could get a plane ticket, and I was like, okay, I'm there. Like, so yes, I did this REI trip, which included going to a couple days of it were in Denali National Park. No, we did not do the bus trip. The last day we had the choice between the bus trip, or one of the guides was, and another guide was leading a hike, and I went back and forth. Do I want to do this hike? Do I want to do this bus trip? And I decided to do this hike because I hadn't gotten to hike in that area much yet. So, and people on the bus trip saw some pretty amazing wildlife, and yeah. So I need to go back and do the bus trip, and you know.
Anybody else? I want to be respectful of your time as well.
Oh, no.
So maybe one or two more, if we got them.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. As I said, I really appreciate you having me here, and you know, everybody coming out and listening to me ramble for a while. So, thank you.
Thank you. Just to remind you that his book is for sale out here. For somewhere you'll hang around for a little bit, I'm sure, and chat with us. There's fellowship, and there's some food and beverage. And then lastly, if you want to be informed about other conversations or other opportunities like this, there is a sign-up sheet on the table just outside this door. If you'll put your email down, we'll keep you in contact so you can know about future events. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Mark.